One waitress, one pompous tycoon, and a grand piano. What began as an arrogant ploy to demean her ended in a breathtaking display that left the entire room speechless. With nothing but her unwavering spirit and raw talent, she transformed humiliation into triumph. You won't believe how she flipped the script and reminded everyone of the true meaning of grace and resilience. The warm glow of the setting sun washed over Charleston, South Carolina, painting the cobblestone streets in hues of amber and rose. Inside the Crescent Bistro, the soft hum of conversation mixed with the faint strains of jazz played by a live quartet in the corner. The restaurant, known for its elegance and charm, bustled with activity. Servers glided between tables, balancing trays of meticulously plated entrees and crystal glasses of wine. Among them was Mia Harris, her uniform crisp and her movements precise, a beacon of efficiency in the orchestrated chaos. With her dark curls pulled back neatly and a soft, polite smile, she could have been mistaken for someone perfectly content in her role. But inside, Mia's heart ached with longing, a quiet yearning that simmered beneath the surface of her every action. To the patrons at the Crescent Bistro, Mia was just another server. But her co-workers knew there was more to her than her steady hands and calm demeanor. During rare breaks, Mia could sometimes be found sitting at the grand piano tucked into a quiet corner of the restaurant. Those who had witnessed her play, even for just a few minutes, never forgot the way her music seemed to fill the room with something magical, something alive. Music had always been Mia's sanctuary. As a child, she spent countless hours at her grandmother's upright piano, her small fingers stumbling over the keys until they found their rhythm. The piano became her confidant, a friend that never judged, where she could pour out her emotions with every note. Her grandmother had been her first and fiercest cheerleader. "Mia, the world is waiting for your music," she used to say, her voice full of pride and hope. Those words echoed in Mia's mind even now, years after her grandmother's passing. But life had a way of forcing dreams into the background. After her grandmother died, the piano was sold to help cover funeral expenses. Mia had stood silently as strangers carried it away, biting her lip to keep from crying. It wasn't just an instrument to her. It was a piece of her soul. Now, the only piano she had access to was the gleaming grand instrument in the Crescent Bistro. Whenever she had a moment to spare, she would run her fingers over the keys, letting the familiar feel ground her. Though she never played for long, too afraid of drawing attention, those brief moments kept her dream alive. Mia's days were long and filled with responsibilities. Her mother, a single parent who had worked herself to exhaustion to support the family, now relied on Mia to shoulder the load. Between her shifts at the restaurant, Mia juggled paying bills, ensuring her younger brother stayed in college and keeping their small apartment from falling into disrepair. The weight of it all was constant, but Mia bore it silently. To her, the sacrifices were worth it if it meant her brother could have a brighter future. Yet the dream of music lingered in her heart. It wasn't something she could ignore, no matter how much she tried to focus on the practicalities of life. Every time she walked past the piano at the restaurant, her fingers itched to play. It wasn't just a want, it was a need, an unspoken part of who she was. As Mia carried a tray of empty glasses back to the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of the grand piano in the corner. The light from the chandelier above reflected off its polished surface, making it look almost ethereal. She paused for a moment, her breath catching in her throat. How long had it been since she played for real? Not just a quick melody snuck in during a break, but truly played. Poured her heart out through the keys. Her fingers brushed the tray she was holding, her imagination replacing the feel of glass with the cool, smooth touch of piano keys. She could almost hear the melody forming in her mind, the notes rising and falling like waves. But reality snapped her back. A voice called her name from across the room, pulling her out of her thoughts. "Mia, table 4 is ready for their wine," her manager said, his tone firm but kind. Mia nodded, plastering a smile on her face as she moved to fulfill the order. The moment was gone, but the ache remained, a quiet reminder of what she had put aside. As the evening wore on, Mia worked efficiently, her focus unshakable despite the swirling emotions beneath her calm exterior. She chatted politely with patrons, carried plates with practiced ease, and avoided looking too long at the piano. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change. That night, the grand piano wouldn't just be a symbol of her lost dreams, it would become the stage for a moment that would redefine her path forever. For now, though, Mia was just a waitress blending into the elegant backdrop of the Crescent Bistro, quietly carrying her dreams like a secret melody only she could hear. The evening at the Crescent Bistro was in full swing, the warm glow of candlelight illuminating the restaurant's sophisticated decor. Guests sipped on fine wine, exchanged soft laughter, and reveled in the elegance of the evening. Mia Harris moved gracefully between tables, her tray balancing glasses of Chardonnay with a steady hand. The weight of the night's duties was familiar, a rhythm she had perfected over months of working in the upscale restaurant. The soft clinking of glasses and murmur of conversation filled the air when the front doors swung open. A rush of cool air swept into the room, causing several patrons to glance toward the entrance. Striding in as if he owned the space was Ethan King, a man whose reputation often preceded him. Ethan King was tall and impeccably dressed, his tailored suit fitting him as if sculpted to his frame. His arrival was anything but subtle. He entered with a confident swagger, flanked by a small entourage of equally polished companions. His presence commanded attention, and the hum of conversation dimmed momentarily as eyes turned to the man who seemed to bask in the spotlight. Ethan was well known in Charleston. A successful entrepreneur with a flair for theatrics, his name often appeared in gossip columns for his lavish parties and sharp-tongued interviews. Despite his wealth and charm, he had a reputation for being difficult, a man who thrived on control and enjoyed pushing boundaries, often at the expense of others. Mia caught sight of him as she moved toward the bar to retrieve a drink order. His arrival didn't fluster her, though she could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere as the staff exchanged wary glances. Ethan wasn't just a customer. He was a presence, one that could either go unnoticed or dominate the evening depending on his mood. Ethan and his group settled into a corner table, the best spot in the house, overlooking the bustling dining room. Mia was assigned to their table, and as she approached, she felt his gaze settle on her. It wasn't kind or curious. It was appraising, like a critic sizing up a performance. "Good evening," she greeted, her tone polite but firm. "Welcome to the Crescent Bistro. Can I start you off with drinks?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "Ah, service with a smile. Just what I'd expect from a place like this." Mia's smile didn't falter, but the comment hung in the air, dripping with condescension. She took their drink orders quickly, making a mental note to keep her interactions brief. As she turned to leave, Ethan's voice followed her. "What's your name?" "Mia," she replied, glancing over her shoulder. "Mia," he repeated, as though testing how the name sounded on his tongue. "A name that suggests hidden talents. Let's see if you live up to it." She didn't respond, her pace steady as she walked away, but her stomach churned. Something about his tone was unsettling, and she could feel the heat of his gaze following her as she moved through the dining room. Throughout the evening, Ethan's table was a magnet for attention. His booming voice carried across the room as he recounted tales of his success and sprinkled in thinly veiled jabs at those he deemed less ambitious. His companions laughed dutifully at his remarks, though a few diners nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances. Mia did her best to remain professional. She delivered their drinks, took their dinner orders, and avoided engaging in conversation as much as possible. But Ethan's gaze rarely left her, and with each visit to the table his comments grew bolder. "So, Mia," he said as she refilled their water glasses, "tell me, what's a woman like you doing in a place like this? Surely you have bigger aspirations than carrying trays." His question was loud enough for nearby tables to hear, and Mia felt the weight of their curiosity. She hesitated for a moment before answering, keeping her tone even. "I enjoy my work here." Ethan chuckled, a sound that carried an edge of disbelief. "That's a nice way of saying you're stuck here, isn't it?" His companions laughed, but Mia felt her cheeks flush. She tightened her grip on the pitcher and moved to the next table, unwilling to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Ethan wasn't done with her. As the night wore on, his attention remained fixed on Mia. It wasn't just casual curiosity, it was predatory, as though he were searching for a weakness to exploit. His companions noticed too, their laughter growing quieter, tinged with unease. At one point, Mia overheard a snippet of conversation from Ethan's table. One of his companions, a young man with a softer demeanor, mentioned the piano in the corner and how the restaurant staff sometimes played during slower hours. "Wait, Mia plays the piano?" Ethan's voice cut through the chatter, loud and intrigued. "Why didn't anyone mention this before?" Mia froze for a moment, her tray balanced on one hand as the realization dawned. He was planning something. She didn't know what, but the glint in his eye as he glanced at her was enough to send a shiver down her spine. As she returned to the kitchen to retrieve another order, she caught the eye of one of her co-workers, Lisa. The older woman offered a small nod of encouragement as if to say, "You've got this." It was a small gesture, but it steadied Mia's nerves. Still, the feeling of foreboding lingered. Ethan wasn't just another difficult customer. He was calculating, and Mia could sense that whatever he was planning, it wasn't going to be kind. The evening wore on, and the hum of the Crescent Bistro began to mellow as diners finished their meals. The warm glow of the chandeliers gave the space an almost ethereal ambiance, but for Mia Harris the air was heavy with an unshakable tension. She could feel it. Ethan King was about to make his move. Mia tried to focus on her work, clearing plates and delivering desserts, but every time she glanced toward Ethan's table, she found his eyes on her. His companions had grown quieter, their laughter replaced by awkward silences as they exchanged uneasy glances. Even they could sense Ethan's brewing scheme. As Mia approached their table to drop off the check, Ethan leaned back in his chair, swirling the last of his scotch in its glass. He spoke loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, his voice carrying the same air of superiority that had marked his every word that evening. "So, Mia," he began, his tone casual but with an edge of amusement, "I've been hearing rumors about you. Word is you're not just a waitress. You're a pianist." Mia paused, her tray balanced in one hand. Her heart sank, and she felt her face flush as the room seemed to turn its attention toward her. "I play a little," she said, her voice quiet but steady. She quickly turned to leave, hoping to escape the sudden spotlight. But Ethan wasn't about to let her go so easily. "A little?" he said, louder this time. "From what I hear, you're pretty talented. Why don't you show us?" The dining room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Conversations halted, forks froze midair, and all eyes turned to Mia. She stood frozen, her mind racing for an excuse to decline without creating a scene. "I appreciate the thought," Mia replied, forcing a polite smile. "But I'm working right now." Ethan wasn't deterred. He leaned forward, his smirk widening as if he had been waiting for this exact moment. "Come on, Mia. Surely you can take a few minutes to grace us with your talent? Or are you afraid?" His companions chuckled nervously, and the diners around them watched with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Mia's co-workers stood by the kitchen entrance, their faces filled with silent encouragement, but none dared intervene. Ethan's smirk deepened as Mia hesitated. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as though declaring victory. "Ah," he said with mock disappointment. "I get it. Maybe you're not as good as they say. All talk, no talent." The words hit Mia like a slap. Her grip on the tray tightened, and she felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't one to seek confrontation, but something about his tone, so dismissive, so demeaning, lit a fire within her. Memories of her mother's encouragement and her grandmother's piano echoed in her mind. Never let anyone make you feel small. Mia straightened her back and took a deep breath. She locked eyes with Ethan, her voice steady as she said, "Fine, I'll play." The room buzzed with anticipation as Mia made her way to the grand piano in the corner. Each step felt heavier than the last, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, some curious, some skeptical, and one, Ethan's, smug and expectant. She slid onto the bench, her trembling fingers brushing the polished keys. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if she faltered? What if she proved Ethan right? But then she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. This wasn't about Ethan, this was about her. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The first notes of Clair de Lune floated into the air, soft and tentative, like the opening of a delicate flower. The room grew still, the clinking of silverware and low murmurs replaced by the hauntingly beautiful melody. Mia's nerves began to melt away as she lost herself in the music. Her fingers danced across the keys, each note carrying a piece of her story. The sacrifices her mother made, the nights she spent alone at the piano, the ache of dreams put on hold. The music swelled, filling the room with a raw emotion that was impossible to ignore. Diners leaned forward in their chairs, captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Even Ethan's companions, who had laughed so freely earlier, sat in stunned silence. As Mia reached the piece's crescendo, her confidence soared. Her hands moved with a grace that belied the turmoil she felt earlier. The notes were no longer just sounds. They were her voice, her defiance, her truth. Behind her, Ethan's expression shifted. The smugness faded, replaced by an unreadable mix of surprise and discomfort. He had expected to humiliate her, to watch her falter. Instead, she had silenced the room and stolen the attention he so often craved. The final notes rang out, lingering in the air like the echo of a heartbeat. Mia let her hands rest on the keys, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. For a moment the room remained silent, as if no one dared disturb the magic she had created. The dining room was utterly still. Mia's final notes hung in the air, delicate and resonant like the soft whispers of a dream. The grand piano stood as a silent witness to her performance, its polished surface gleaming under the warm chandelier light. For a few breathless moments there was nothing. No clinking silverware, no murmurs, just the echo of her music fading into silence. Then the applause began, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Diners rose to their feet, clapping and cheering with a fervor that brought tears to Mia's eyes. Her co-workers clapped the loudest, their faces beaming with pride. Ethan clapped too, but his applause was slow and hollow, a weak attempt to mask his discomfort. Mia turned to face the room, her head held high. She didn't need his approval. She had already won. Diners rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically, their earlier whispers and sideways glances replaced by audible admiration. Some called out praise, while others simply stood, their faces etched with awe. Even the waitstaff, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway, cheered and clapped, their pride for Mia evident in their wide smiles and teary eyes. Mia sat frozen at the piano bench, her hand still hovering over the keys. Her heart raced, not from fear, but from the rush of what she had just accomplished. The intensity of the applause felt almost surreal, as though she were outside herself watching it all unfold. She glanced around the room, her gaze catching on faces filled with admiration. An elderly woman near the back wiped her eyes with a handkerchief, and a man in a tailored suit gave her a thumbs up. Mia's chest tightened with emotion. These weren't just patrons. They had become part of her story. Ethan King, however, remained seated. His slow, hesitant applause stood in stark contrast to the thunderous ovation around him. His once confident smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that teetered between annoyance and forced admiration. He looked uncomfortable, out of place, as though the room no longer revolved around him. For the first time that evening, Ethan wasn't the center of attention, and he hated it. Mia caught his eye as she stood from the piano bench. He offered a strained smile, lifting his glass of scotch and a mock toast. "Well played," he said loudly enough for the room to hear, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Quite the performance." But the comment fell flat. The room had shifted, its energy transformed by Mia's music. No one laughed, and Ethan's companions avoided his gaze, their earlier bravado replaced by awkward silence. Mia met Ethan's comment with a calm, steady gaze. "Thank you," she said, her voice clear but devoid of warmth. She didn't need his validation. The applause of the room was more than enough. As Mia returned to her station, her co-workers greeted her with quiet applause and encouraging whispers. "You were amazing," one of them said, beaming with pride. Another patted her shoulder, their expression filled with unspoken admiration. Mia smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had always thought of her co-workers as a supportive but distant part of her life. Tonight they felt like family, her cheerleaders in a moment she hadn't anticipated. Ethan, meanwhile, tried to recover some semblance of control at his table. "Quite the surprise," he muttered to his companions, but they didn't respond. Their focus was elsewhere, their earlier admiration for him overshadowed by the respect they now felt for Mia. Ethan called Mia over as she passed by his table. "You've got a real gift," he said, his tone feigning sincerity. "Maybe you should consider a career in music." Mia paused, meeting his gaze. She saw through his forced compliments, recognizing them for what they were, a weak attempt to regain his footing after being thoroughly humbled. "Maybe I will," she replied, her tone polite but firm. "Thank you for the suggestion." Her words carried a quiet strength that left Ethan momentarily speechless. She turned and walked away, her head held high, leaving him to stew in the aftermath of his failed attempt to diminish her. As the evening wound down, patrons stopped Mia to compliment her performance. "That was beautiful," one woman said, taking Mia's hand in hers. "You have a gift, my dear. Don't let it go to waste." Another man, a regular customer, smiled warmly. "I had no idea you could play like that. You're not just talented, you're extraordinary." Mia thanked them humbly, each word of praise reigniting the spark within her. She had spent so long doubting herself, questioning whether her dreams were worth pursuing. Tonight, she had proven to herself, and to everyone else, that they were. The dining room at Crescent Bistro began to return to its usual rhythm. Plates clinked, glasses refilled, and low conversations filled the space once more. But the atmosphere had shifted. It was as though the room still vibrated with the echoes of Mia's performance, her music lingering in the air like a memory too powerful to fade. Mia continued her duties, her steps lighter, her movements more confident. Though her heart still raced from the adrenaline of performing, she felt an unfamiliar warmth, pride. She had done something extraordinary, not just for herself, but for anyone in the room who needed to be reminded of the transformative power of authenticity. As she carried plates back to the kitchen, diners stopped her, one after another. Their words were kind and heartfelt, voices brimming with admiration. "You moved me to tears," said a middle-aged woman, her eyes glistening. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Another diner, a young man in a crisp suit, leaned forward. "You're not just a waitress," he said with a quiet conviction. "You're an artist. Don't ever forget that." Mia thanked them with humble nods and soft smiles, but each compliment was like a small spark reigniting the flame of her long-held dream. She'd spent years hiding her passion, believing it was impractical, unattainable. Tonight, strangers were validating the part of her she had tried so hard to suppress. Not everyone in the room shared the same sincerity. As Mia approached Ethan King's table to clear away empty glasses, he looked up at her with an awkward smile. The cocky demeanor he had flaunted earlier was nowhere to be seen. "That was impressive," he said, his tone lighter but still holding a hint of condescension. "You've got talent. Real talent. I didn't mean anything earlier, you know. It was all in good fun." Mia paused, her eyes steady as they met his. His attempt at an apology was more about salvaging his ego than expressing genuine regret, and she could see right through it. "Thank you," she said simply, her tone polite but distant. She didn't need to dignify his words with anything more. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier smugness now replaced with uncertainty. His companions offered no support, their focus on their drinks and plates, unwilling to meet his gaze. The power he had wielded so confidently at the start of the evening had crumbled, leaving him exposed. Mia turned and walked away, leaving Ethan to his own discomfort. She didn't need his approval, the applause of the room, the heartfelt compliments of the patrons, and most importantly, the realization that she had stayed true to herself. Those were what mattered. Back in the kitchen, her co-workers greeted her with beaming smiles and light applause. "You killed it out there," said Rachel, one of the senior waitresses. "I knew you had it in you." "Seriously," added another. "Why aren't you performing on bigger stages? You're amazing." Mia laughed softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I guess I needed tonight to remember what I'm capable of." As the evening wore on, Ethan and his entourage prepared to leave. There was no grand exit, no boisterous laughter or show of dominance. Instead, they left quietly, their earlier bravado replaced by subdued silence. Ethan hesitated as he passed Mia near the entrance. He opened his mouth as though to say something but quickly closed it, offering only a weak nod before walking out the door. Mia watched him go, her expression unreadable. She felt no triumph in his discomfort, only a quiet satisfaction that she had reclaimed her power. With the dining room nearly empty, Mia returned to the piano. She placed her hands on the keys, letting the smooth surface ground her in the moment. The night had been unexpected, emotional, and transformative. Her manager approached, standing silently for a moment before speaking. "You were incredible tonight, Mia," he said. "I've seen a lot of performers, but what you did, that was something else." "Thank you," she replied, her voice soft but steady. She glanced down at the piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys. "I think I needed this more than I realized." The manager nodded, sensing the depth of her words. "You've got something special," he said. "Don't let it go to waste." As he walked away, Mia stayed at the piano for a moment longer, reflecting on the night. She had faced her fears, silenced her doubts, and shown the world, if only for a fleeting moment, who she truly was. When she finally locked up the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air, Mia felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stars above twinkled faintly as though they too were celebrating her quiet victory. She smiled to herself, the weight of doubt that had followed her for years now lifted. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt like she was on the right path, and she wasn't afraid to take the next step. The morning sun bathed Charleston in a soft golden glow as Mia Harris sat at her small dining table, staring at her phone. The events of the previous evening still replayed in her mind, vivid as a dream she never wanted to end. She sipped her coffee, trying to savor the rare calm when her phone buzzed. The number on the screen was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" she said cautiously. "Is this Mia Harris?" a warm, professional voice asked on the other end. "Yes, this is Mia," she replied, her brow furrowing slightly. "This is Mark Dawson. I was dining at Crescent Bistro last night and heard your performance. I work as a music producer, and I have to say, you have an incredible gift." Mia's heart skipped a beat. She clutched her coffee mug tighter, her breath catching in her throat. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if you've ever considered recording your work, but I'd love to offer you an opportunity to come to my studio and record a demo. No pressure. It's just a chance to explore your talent further." Mia's mind raced. A music producer, a chance to record? It sounded surreal, like a scenario she'd only imagined during quiet nights spent at her worn piano. I don't know what to say," she stammered, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and excitement. "Thank you for reaching out. I'd love to discuss it further." "Fantastic," Mark said warmly. "I'll email you the details. Take your time to think about it, but I truly believe you have something special, Mia." As the call ended, Mia sat in stunned silence. The reality of what just happened slowly began to sink in. This wasn't just a compliment from a passerby, it was an opportunity, a door she hadn't even dared to hope for opening before her. When Mia arrived at work later that evening, her co-workers greeted her with cheers and hugs. Word of her performance had spread quickly, and the staff couldn't contain their excitement. "You were the talk of the night," Rachel exclaimed, her eyes bright with pride. "Even the diners couldn't stop raving about you." "You're a star in the making," added another co-worker. "When you're famous, don't forget us little people." Mia laughed, her cheeks flushing. Their encouragement felt like a warm blanket, shielding her from the self-doubt that still lingered in the corners of her mind. The manager pulled her aside before the dinner rush began. "Mia, I just want you to know how proud I am of you," he said sincerely. "You reminded all of us why we fell in love with music, art, and passion in the first place. If you ever need time off to pursue this opportunity, you've got my full support." Tears pricked Mia's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It means so much to me." Over the next few days, Mia's life took on a new rhythm. When she wasn't at the bistro, she was at home practicing tirelessly on her upright piano. Her fingers moved with renewed purpose, her heart pouring into every note. The email from Mark Dawson arrived as promised, detailing the studio session he had arranged. It felt surreal seeing her name associated with something so professional. For the first time in years, Mia allowed herself to imagine a future where music wasn't just a dream, it was her reality. She spent her evenings at the piano, rediscovering pieces she'd once mastered and composing new melodies that reflected her journey. Music, once a distant hope, was now a tangible part of her daily life. Her neighbors often stopped her in the hallway to compliment the music drifting from her apartment, their kind words adding fuel to her growing confidence. Patrons who had witnessed Mia's performance returned to the bistro, seeking her out to express their admiration. Some left generous tips with notes scribbled on napkins. "Never stop playing." Others simply offered kind words as she served their meals. Even those who hadn't been there had heard the story, and the restaurant became a quiet hub of support for Mia's burgeoning dream. Her co-workers, regulars, and even the restaurant owner rallied behind her, offering words of encouragement and advice. "You're going to do great," Rachel said one evening as they closed up. "When you're on that big stage someday, just remember, you were always meant to be there." Mia smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. Their belief in her felt like a safety net, catching her every time her own doubts threatened to resurface. The day of the studio session arrived with a mix of nerves and excitement. Mia walked into the sleek modern space feeling both out of place and exactly where she belonged. Mark greeted her warmly, introducing her to the sound engineers and showing her the grand piano that awaited her. "It's all yours," he said, gesturing to the instrument. "Take your time, and let's see what magic you create." Mia approached the piano, her hands trembling slightly as she ran her fingers over the keys. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath and let the music flow. She played as if no one was watching, her heart guiding her hands across the keys. The melody she created was raw, powerful, and deeply personal, a culmination of her struggles, triumphs, and unyielding passion. When she finished, the room was silent. Mark smiled, his expression filled with admiration. "That," he said, "is exactly what the world needs to hear." The session ended with Mark promising to share the demo with industry contacts. As Mia walked out of the studio, the Charleston skyline glowing behind her, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was just the beginning, but it was more than she had dared to dream of. Back at the bistro that evening, her co-workers greeted her with eager questions about the session. Mia shared the highlights, their excitement mirroring her own. "You're on your way," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We always knew you had it in you." Mia smiled, her heart full. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe it too. The future wasn't just a distant hope. It was a melody waiting to be played. The crisp air of an autumn morning filled Mia Harris's modest apartment. She sat at her old upright piano, her fingers gliding effortlessly over the worn keys. The sunlight streaming through the window bathed her in a golden glow, reflecting the peace and determination she now carried within her. This was not the Mia who had once hidden her talent beneath a waitress's apron. This was a woman rediscovering her voice, her purpose, and her dreams. The recording session had been just the beginning. The demo Mia created was well received, and Mark Dawson, the producer, had shared it with industry contacts who were eager to meet her. For the first time, Mia's music wasn't just a private passion but a tangible path forward. One evening, as she wiped down tables at the bistro, her phone buzzed. It was an email from a small independent record label in Nashville. They had heard her demo and wanted to meet with her to discuss potential collaborations. Mia's heart raced as she read the words. This wasn't just a fleeting opportunity. It was the kind of chance she had dreamed of since she first touched the keys of her grandmother's piano. Her co-workers celebrated the news with her. Rachel, always her biggest cheerleader, hugged her tightly. "I told you this was just the beginning," she said, her voice brimming with pride. "You're going to shine, Mia. We all know it." Mia felt the weight of their belief in her. Their support had been a constant source of strength, and she was determined not to let them down. The weeks leading up to her meeting in Nashville were filled with preparation. Mia poured herself into her music, writing new pieces and refining old ones. Each melody carried a piece of her journey, the struggles, the heartbreak, and the resilience that brought her to this moment. One evening, as she sat at her piano, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful night at the bistro. She thought of Ethan King, the wealthy entrepreneur who had mocked her and unintentionally set her on this path. What had felt like a moment of humiliation had become the spark that reignited her passion. Her music wasn't just notes on a page, it was a message. A message to herself, to others who felt silenced or overlooked, and to anyone who dared to dream. Never let fear or ridicule stop you from pursuing your passions. The meeting in Nashville was a nerve-wracking but exhilarating experience. The label executives were captivated by Mia's authenticity and raw talent. They offered her a modest deal to record an EP, a collection of songs that would serve as her introduction to the world. Mia's first instinct was to feel overwhelmed. The thought of sharing her music on such a large scale was both thrilling and terrifying. But she remembered the courage it took to play in front of the diners that night, the way she had silenced the room and turned the tide. She had faced fear before, and she could do it again. "I'm ready," she told the executives, her voice steady with determination. Back in Charleston, Mia continued to work at the bistro while preparing for her first professional recording session. The piano, once a distant symbol of a life she thought she couldn't reach, was now at the center of her world again. Ethan King, the man who had unknowingly set her journey in motion, remained a distant memory. Mia didn't hold resentment toward him. In fact, she felt a quiet gratitude. His arrogance had pushed her to prove something, not to him, but to herself, and that was a victory she carried with pride. The bistro became more than just a workplace, it was a second home. Her co-workers and regular patrons rallied behind her, contributing to a small fund to help cover her travel and recording expenses. Mia was deeply moved by their generosity. They had seen her not as a waitress but as an artist, and their belief in her was a gift she would treasure forever. "You've always been one of us," Rachel said as they handed Mia the envelope. "Now go out there and show the world what we've known all along. You're amazing." Months later, Mia held a small listening party at the bistro to celebrate the release of her EP. The room was filled with friends, co-workers, and patrons who had supported her journey from the very beginning. As the first track played, the room filled with the same silence that had followed her performance that pivotal night. But this time, it wasn't the silence of doubt. It was the reverence of people witnessing someone who had embraced her destiny. Tears filled Mia's eyes as she looked around the room. Her journey wasn't over. There were still challenges ahead and dreams to chase. But this moment felt like a promise fulfilled. She had reclaimed her life, her passion, and her voice. As the evening wound down, Mia sat at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys. She played a new melody, one she had written to honor the people who had believed in her. It was a song about resilience, hope, and the power of community. The diners listened, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet smiles. When the final note rang out, the room erupted into applause. But this time, Mia didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt complete. In the days that followed, Mia shared her story with anyone who would listen. She wanted people to know that talent wasn't enough. It was resilience, authenticity, and the courage to take risks that truly mattered. To anyone out there holding on to a dream, she said in a video she posted online, "Don't let fear or doubt hold you back. The world needs your voice, your passion, your art. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Her message resonated, inspiring countless others to take their own steps toward fulfillment. Mia's journey was just beginning, but she knew one thing for certain. The piano, her steadfast companion, would always be there, ready to help her tell her story. And so, with her music, her resilience, and her community beside her, Mia Harris began the next chapter of her life, one filled with possibility, purpose, and the joy of a dream reclaimed. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of triumph, resilience, and heart. Your story could be next.